it's Jazz at Red Panda Reads and welcome to my board game gift guide. I very much hope that this video gives you some good ideas of board game presents you can get for people during the holiday season and other celebrations in general. And I've covered a wide range of potential gifties, gifties. What do you call the people who receive gifts? Basically, I've made sure that these board games target a wide range of people from, that person called Greg who you've actually never spoken to at work but you've ended up with for Secret Santa, to your friends who love board games and they've got them coming out of their ears and you don't really know where to start with the board game presents. As well as giving a quick overview of each game, I'm also going to be letting you know the rough price of each game so you have an idea of how much they will cost to purchase if you do think about buying one of these as a present. So the first category is Secret Santa, and these are your board games that retail at less than £15 that will make really fantastic presents which are more affordable than a lot of other board games. And the first kind of subcategory, yes, I've gone there, I've got subcategories. So the first subcategory is that person who you've ended up with Secret Santa but you don't know anything about and you're thinking, what do I get them? So I've got two board games which are both small, compact, easy to learn and really good during the holiday season because they're really good for big groups and for families. And the first one of those two is a game that I think I've had my whole life. I think this box is older than I am, and that is Pass the Pigs. What a classic. So Pass the Pig is a pig throwing game where you basically throw these two little oinkoinks, or also known as pigs, these two little pigs, and depending how they land gives you points. However, you keep on throwing the pigs until you decide to stop and take your points, or you lose all your points because of the way the pigs have landed. So there's a little bit of risk, a little bit of hedging your bets, and the first person to get 100 points wins the game. So this is just a fantastic little board game and it retails for £10 and it's for 2 to 4 players. So I reckon you can play it with 2 players plus. So the next board game that you could also get for your colleague that you don't know is Anomia or Anomia, however you say this game. And this is a mind-boggling, fast-paced word board game. And you basically have a set of cards each, and every time you turn over the cards, your card will have a category on it, such as a 3-letter word and a pattern, such as these pretty 4 red dots or a yellow diamond or purple zigzags. And when your pattern matches another player's pattern, you have to say a word that matches the category on their card, and they have to say a word that matches the category on your card. So it becomes quite complex. You cannot play this game when you are tired, but it's a very funny, great party game. And this retails at about £10 to £13, and I think it's 2+ players. Ignore that, it's 3 to 6 players. So now the person you've got for Secret Santa is someone who loves board games and you just don't know where to start because a lot of board games are out of the Secret Santa budget and you want something a little bit more tactical than the party games that I've already mentioned. And I cannot believe the game I am about to say only retails for £10. The artwork is beautiful, the strategy in this game is marvellously put together, and it's just such a wonderful game. And this is a 2-player game, and I've already raved about it many a time, and that 2-player game is Fungi. Yes, look at this artwork, only £10. This is a card-based game where you were moving through a forest foraging for mushrooms, and you have to collect sets of 3 or more mushrooms, and then you've got to cook them in your frying pans. Just admiring these beautiful cards. You score points depending on how tasty the mushrooms are, and you've got to tactically try and stop your opponent cooking mushrooms. And you've also got to be very aware of your hand limit because that limit really hinders what you are able to do. And so you have to think about every move and the few moves afterwards very carefully. But absolutely brilliant game, and as I've said, 2 players, probably takes about 20 to 40 minutes to play, and it's just such a gem. And for £10, how can you not buy this? So the last two games in this category are slightly more specific because they're for people who like cats. So the first person is going to be someone who likes cats who you get on really well with, and the perfect game for them would be the cat game. I'm so sad I don't have a copy of this game on me to show you because the box is fluffy. Yes, the box is literally fluffy. It's ridiculous. And this is a bit of a kind of Pictionary style game. You basically have cats in different positions and then different prompts. For example, Isaac Newton, Joan of Arc, Henry VIII. And then you basically have to turn the cat into that person or make that cat do the activity that you've been given. And everyone else has to guess what you're drawing on the cat. And it's very, very silly, but a very, very fun party game. And it's for 3+ players and only retailing in some places for £5. So it's about £5 to £10 in general. But fabulous for any cat lover. They'll get a lot of fun and laughs out of it. If you don't particularly like that person in the office who loves cats, an alternative cat-based theme game for under £15 is Kittens in a Blender. Yes, you heard me right. There is a board game called Kittens in a Blender, and apparently some of the proceeds for this board game go towards a cat shelter. So it's not as evil as it appears on the box, but basically it's a card-based game again. You have your kittens that you're trying to save, and you're trying to put all your opponent's kittens into a blender, and the person who saves the most kittens at the end of the game wins. And I find with this game, people get very attached to a specific cat, for example, Schmeedly. And so for me personally, this has kind of broken the game because I try desperately to blend Schmeedly throughout the game, and my partner tries desperately to save Schmeedly, and the rest of the game goes out the window. But normally it's got some really fun tactical elements, and it is a lot of luck, but it is just very silly and very fun. And the game is for 2 to 4 players and retails for £10. So those are all my Secret Santa ideas, and let me know if you have any fabulous board games for under £15 that you would highly recommend. So next we're going to move on to fabulous board games for 2 players. And these are really good games for a couple or 2 flatmates that live together and maybe don't get the chance to always play board games in bigger groups. And of course, Fungi is up there, but I've already spoken about it. So I've got 3 other games. And I just want to add, I did a whole video about my favourite 2-player board games, and I haven't included any of those in this list because I've actually recently discovered a few more that I really enjoyed and wanted to share with you. But all the board games in that video make fabulous, fabulous gifts, and I would really recommend checking the video out and considering any of those I mentioned also for presents for people. But anyway, let's carry on with this category. So the first game I want to mention is a cooperative card game, and that is the Foxes in the Forest Duet. So in this game, you are both playing cards and taking tricks, and this allows you to move your foxes through a forest. And you're trying to collect gems throughout the forest, but at the same time, you don't want your foxes to go too far into the forest because then they'll get lost. And I think you have 3 chances to complete the board and get all the gems for your foxes. However, it's quite tricky to actually beat the board, and I love that aspect. It's, for example, games like Forbidden Island, any co-op game where you're going against the clock and it's not easy, I find really satisfying because I just want to play it again and again, and I get really competitive against the board rather than my opponent, which I think is nice because the board won't get offended if I get annoyed with it. So that is the first game I want to mention, and it's just, again, beautiful artwork, a really charming theme, and I think it's nice to suggest some co-op games because they just work better for some people. The Fox in the Forest actually also retails for £10 to £15, so really, really good value. The next board game is one that I was actually gifted really recently, so thank you Heidi and Tom, thank you Heidi and Tom, and I just can't stop playing it. and that board game is Troika. This board game, although it is small, it is deceptively strategic and deceptively fun. And on the surface, you're basically flying down in your spaceship to a planet, and you are collecting gems, and each gem has a different number on it. So here are your gems. And on your go, you can either take a face up gem, a face down gem, or you can put any of your gems back into the mix in the center. And you're basically trying to get runs of 3 to score you points. So say, do I have a run here? Sadly, I don't. Oh, I do have a run. Oh, already getting points. So you're trying to make runs of 3, and every run of 3 will give you points, and the points are equal to the final digit in your run. So in this case, 13, 14, 15 would get you 5 points, 6, 7, 8 would get you 8 points, and so on. And the person with the most points at the end of the round wins that round. However, you've landed on the planet. You also need to get fuel to get off the planet. So as well as collecting points, you need to make sure that you collect 3 of the same number, which makes up your fuel and gets you off the planet. And you can't use those numbers in your runs. And it's just a really fun, strategic, fairly fast-paced board game, which has enough strategy to make it intriguing, but so simple to learn, and I would highly recommend. This does retail at about £17 and is for 2 to 4 players, but again, fantastic for 2 players. We have been playing it every day for the last month, so I've definitely got a little bit addicted to this little board game. And the final 2-player game I want to suggest is again a little bit more specific. This is a board game called T.I.M.E. And if you are a Patrick Rothfuss fan, you will recognise the name of this board game, because yes, this board game is named after a board game that was created for a fantasy book. So Patrick Rothfuss is a fantasy author who's written the Kingslayer Chronicles, which is an incredible fantasy series. The world building and the character development is just stunning, and they're probably some of my favourite fantasy books. And within this world, there is a board game called T.I.M.E, which is an abstract strategy board game where you are basically trying to create a line of counters from one side of the board to the other, and then you win. And basically Patrick Rothfuss sat down with a board game designer and actually made this game in the flesh. And it's exactly as I've described. You're trying to get across the board, and while you're doing that, your opponent is also trying to get across the board while stopping you doing the same. And you have different tiles which do different things, so have different movements, and it's just such a intense, interesting, strategic game. Next up, I want to talk about some light strategy games which would make really good presents for people who are just in general board game lovers, or people who have started getting into the world of board games with games such as Carcassonne and Catan and are ready to take the next step to see what else is on the horizon. And the first game I want to talk about is the Quacks of Quedlinburg, which is a fabulous potion making game. So in this game, you are all making potions, and you have a drawstring ingredient bag, and each of you at the same time blindly pick an ingredient out of your bag and put it into your cauldron. And then over time, you put more and more ingredients into your cauldron, which gives you more points and will also enable you to get money at the end of the round to buy more ingredients to increase the chances of you getting more points in subsequent rounds. However, there are certain ingredients that if you get a certain number of them, they will cause your potion to explode, which means you either have to choose the points or the money at the end of the round. So you very much, again, there's an element of risk in this game. Do you carry on drafting or not? Then there's also the thoughts of, do you take the points or do you take the money? Because the money will enable you to potentially get more points in the future. But if you don't get those points, will it reduce the chance of you actually winning the game. So really, really fun game, really charming concept, and it's very active. Everyone is constantly doing something, which is quite nice because certain games, even with Carcassonne, some people can spend quite a long time thinking, which is perfectly fine. But if you want a game that holds people's attention, Quacks of Quedlinburg is a really great example of a game that does this. Now let's talk about one of my favourite board games, and that is Sagrada. Look how beautiful this board game is. It's a board game that will retail for about £27 to £40, so similar to Quacks of Quedlinburg, and it is for 2 to 4 players, though you can get an extension for up to 6 players, but that costs additional money. And it is a dice drawing game. So I'm just going to show you how absolutely gorgeous this game is. So you've got a score tracker here, you've got these absolutely phenomenal stained glass windows, and you've also got the absolutely beautiful coloured dice. And in this game, you take turns picking dice from a dice pool and putting it into your stained glass windows. The stained glass window will have a pattern inserted inside it, so you can only place dice in certain places. For example, you can only put 5 dice there, you can only put a green there, and you've got to make sure you obey all the rules. And certain patterns and certain combinations of dice will give you additional points at the end of the game, and any leftover places at the end of the game will give you negatives. So as well as thinking about obeying the patterns on the slide which is put into the stained glass window, you also have certain restrictions to how you can play your dice. So you're never allowed to put the same coloured dice next to each other horizontally or vertically. You can diagonally, and similarly, you can never put the same number next to each other horizontally or vertically. So I love the kind of pattern thinking here. So there's a lot of focus on patterns, and it's just such a beautiful, beautiful board game. And there's some wonderful extensions which add new dimensions to it and make it even more mind-boggling when you're trying to, for example, a pattern that you can do is having no repeated numbers in the same row will get you 5 points. No repeated colours in the same row may get you certain amounts of points. So you've got all these different things you've got to think about, and it can get quite confusing, but it's just such a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful board game, and I love it. And it's my favourite dice drawing board game I've ever played. So the last board game in this category is Bunny Kingdom, and I've only played this a couple of times at our local board game cafe, and I just really, really loved it. It's for 2 to 4 players, retails at £30 to £40, so similar to the other two, and it is slightly more involved. In this board game, you take turns drafting cards, which will give you different abilities to play after the card drafting round. For example, it'll give you the chance to place bunnies on certain grid numbers. It will let you put castles down. It will give you certain resources. And the aim is to create these bunny empires that get you as many points as possible. And it's really good fun. I love the theming of kind of like berserk bunnies desperately trying to, protect their lands and destroy other bunnies. And it's just quite a fun game. Once you've learnt it, the rules are pretty straightforward, but the rule book is quite intense. And the first time I played it, I misread one of the most important rules and changed the complete dynamics of the game, which my partner won't let me live down. So the next category are some board game recommendations for your more seasoned board gamers. So people who are looking for something a little bit different or something a little bit more intense. These are the type of board gamers who are happy to sit down for a whole day playing the same board game, and I am very much one of those people. So the first one I want to mention is another stunning game, and what I love about this game is not only are the mechanics really fun and the artwork very immersive, but it also makes you really think about the effects of climate change and animal survival, and that game is Evolution Climate. So it's quite a chunky game. It is for 2 to 6 players, and it retails, let me just double check, it's quite expensive as well, so it's about £46 plus. And in this game, you're basically creating species and giving them traits to survive and making sure that they can get enough food, that they're protected from predators, and that they're ready to adapt to changes in the environment. And it's just a really different board game to any I've really played before. It's quite chaotic in terms of you can end up with hundreds. You can end up with a lot of cards with different traits. So it takes quite a long time to learn the different traits and what works well together and which ones you should select. So there is a lot of reading in this game, which means it's not the best game to kind of play as a one-off when you've just got friends around. But if you're happy to sit down or you're looking for something a bit different, I would definitely recommend this game. Look how gorgeous it is. You have these food pouches. This is basically your belly where you put all your food in, and at the end of the game you add up all your food that you've managed to get, all your characteristics, your populations, your body size, and that determines how many points you've got. So just beautiful card. Here's an example of some of the traits which you can have. So as you can see, quite a lot of writing and quite a lot to take in and consider as you play. But I would really recommend it, especially for someone who loves animals and loves board games, because I sometimes think the theming of a game can really enhance the experience. So the next board game, which is pretty full on, is a campaign board game which has a number of expansions taking you through different scenarios and adventures, and that is Time Stories. So in Time Stories, you are agents for a company who deals with temporal faults and paradoxes, and you go back in time to basically find out where these paradoxes have occurred and prevent them from happening. And the layout of this game is beautiful because in each adventure you have a room which you're able to explore, and the room basically consists of 5 cards with absolutely gorgeous artwork on the back. And then as you explore each room, you simply turn over the card to find out what is in that area of the room. I don't think I mentioned, but this game is for 2 to 4 players. It is a cooperative game, which is a very nice element to it, and that tends to be in most campaigns, the cooperative games. And it retails at about £40. There are expansions, so different stories, which cost about kind of £15 to £25, and I think even if you know someone has Time Stories, even buying an expansion for the game would be a really lovely gift, because it's such a fun and intricate game, and I think really well reviewed, and I would highly recommend this as even like your first campaign game you ever play if you haven't played one before. So the last big game that I have is a campaign dungeon crawling game, and that is Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. We got this game relatively recently and I've really enjoyed it. I've heard it's not as intense as Gloomhaven, so it's a really good introduction to the universe because it's a lot easier to play and a lot quicker to set up, and definitely a lot less intimidating than Gloomhaven. So Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, you are basically adventurers solving mysteries, and on each day you have a different dungeon that you have to move through, collecting treasure and killing monsters. And it's got a beautiful kind of booklet that has each of the dungeons mapped out, so it's very easy to put together, and you also get the ability to get involved in encounters between each dungeon to upgrade your gear, get new cards. So there's that really nice feeling of upgrading and becoming a better fighter as you experience these adventures. As I mentioned, although it is quite a big box and pretty intense, it is fairly straightforward to learn and quite easy to set up, which I like. It's a cooperative game again for 2 to 4 players, and it will set you back, just trying to show you some of the maps, it will set you back £40, which is actually less than I was expecting. I think big Gloom, I'm dropping everything here. I think the big, I'm not getting it out. It's gonna end in disaster. And yeah, you can get it for 30 to 40 pounds. So would highly recommend that, especially if you know someone who likes Dungeons and Dragons, which moves me on to the next very specific category, which is Dungeons and Dragons. So these are board games for people who either, you know, very much enjoy role-playing games or are considering putting their toes into it. They've watched Critical Role. They're starting to feel the addiction, the need to play a role-playing game, but they're a little bit nervous. They don't know how to go about doing it. These are the games. So Gloomhaven is a great example of a game which has that combat part of D&D in it and that upgrading and character creation. However, it doesn't have the role play. So a good alternative is Escape the Dark Castle, which is for 1 to 4 players, retails at about £20, and you're basically a prisoner in a castle trying to escape it. And each card that is played gives another scenario, whether that's a fight or a trap or an obstacle that you have to get through to escape the castle. And having a bit of kind of role play within this game is quite fun because it makes it very immersive. Talking of themed games, there's a few other board games I want to give a shout out to which have fabulous theming and are also really good board games. So the first is Marrying Mr. Darcy, and you are all women from Jane Austen's novel Pride and Prejudice, and you are trying to find a husband. And you have basically different skills, different abilities. You're trying to collect different cards to give you different traits to make you desirable to your husband. And there is everyone from Mr. Bingley, Mr. Darcy, and of course Mr. Wickham. So you do not want to end up with Mr. Wickham. You do not want to elope with a Mr. Wickham, which is an option. There is a card that just says elopement, scandal, and there's also a card where Mr. Bingley goes to London, so he disappears off the board and no longer can be a suitor. So if you're Jane, oh my goodness, your heart starts hammering. So if you know anyone who is a Pride and Prejudice lover and, you know, may actually not have played many board games, I still think they would really love this because there are so many references to the novel which make it so charming, and you can't help but smile while you play the game. The other board game I want to mention is Carcassonne. So Carcassonne, I would say, is a gateway board game. It's a really fabulous board game for people who haven't really played any other board games other than cards or Monopoly previously, because the rules are very straightforward. It's relatively quick to play if you don't have all the expansions, and there are lots of kind of special editions of Carcassonne which have specific theming. For example, there is a Star Wars one, there is a Hunters and Gatherers one, there is a Christmas themed one, and so you can very much personalise the Carcassonne to the person you're buying the present to, which I think is really nice. This is just the original Carcassonne pack. It is a tile playing game, and I think for someone just getting into board games, this is a must. There are a few other board games which are gateway board games in my opinion. So we've got Ticket to Ride, we have Catan, and we have Alhambra. I'm not going to go into much details about the rules, but they're all, again, very easy to play, light strategy, and have a fantastic replay value. Interestingly, Rob is not a fan of Ticket to Ride, not because he doesn't enjoy the game, but he just finds trains really boring, which I find really funny. For Rob, theming is so important. He's such like a visual person and sound person. He needs music. Like, we'll play a board game and he will put on music to match the board game we're playing, which is kind of charming. So the last category I want to mention is family board games. So you've got your family together, you're trying to think of some board games to play, and I think the number one spot for me has to be Hive Mind. I've talked about this board game before. You basically have a card which has a prompt such as name 4 small red things, and I would write down red pandas, red noses, cherries and tomatoes, and for every answer you put down that someone else has, you get a point. and you're all within a beehive, and the person who gets the least points will move down the beehive. And I always say there are no winners in this game, there are just losers, because the game ends when someone is chucked out of the beehive. They've moved down to a level because they're so out of sync that they just get chucked away. So that is Hive Mind, and it's probably one of my favourite kind of family games, and it also works really well virtually. So if you can't see a family member in person for whatever reason, you can play it via Zoom or Facebook chat or whatever. It just works fantastically like that. So 10 out of 10, recommend that. Another game that I love, but I think it could break a family, is Categories. Which is kind of the opposite to Hive Mind. You basically have different categories and you have to put an answer to each category beginning with a certain letter, and if you have the same answer as someone else, you don't get the point. And this game causes a lot of arguments. So potentially if you really like your in-laws, don't play it. Maybe if you don't like your in-laws, I mean, good way to get them out of the house early. So those are all my recommendations. I would love to know if you have any gift recommendations for me, any board games that you like jazz you need to request this holiday season. I would love to know. Or what board games are you asking for? That's another question. I hope you get an idea of the type of board games I like as well, and therefore tailor your ideas to that. So I have a beautifully curated list of board games from my watches. Like, how perfect would that be? Because I sometimes find it hard to choose a board game if I haven't played it, because as I think we mentioned early on, board games tend to be more expensive just because of the gorgeous artwork and the time and the skill put into it. Like, I completely get it, but it sometimes feels like a bit of a risk buying like a super hefty board game. So that's why I really appreciate all your recommendations. So have a wonderful rest of your week, guys, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye bye.